Hi, this is Jessica Pettit, and who do I have the pleasure of interviewing today?
Hi, my name is Caitlin Nye, and I am a nursing professional development specialist.
Excellent. I also should say, for not foreshadowing. What's the word? Uh,
Um,
uh, Whatever. Insert word here. We are very good friends.
oh,
That is also true.
in full disclosure,
Full disclosure. There you
there
go.
we go. Done. Hi, friend.
Hey, in full
Hey.
disclosure, one of my really good friends. Super
Yes.
excited to have you here, because we have partnered together doing specifically one interactive activity. But what is amazing and why I'm so excited to talk to you, and I don't want to steal your thunder, but we'll get there, is that you are able to do the work that I could never do inside of actual resident nurse development education programs. Is that correct? Is that how you say that? Did I say it right?
So the program that I run at SUNY Upstate University Hospital here in Syracuse, New York, is called a nurse residency program. There are nurse residency programs all over the country. I'm not unique in that regard, but it is a year-long professional development program for registered nurses who are new to the profession. So they come into our hospital as new nurses. I take them under my wings and help them develop. I'm not there helping them do clinical skills necessarily, but help them through a lot of the identity and professional development stuff that happens in that first year in practice. So, and then I oftentimes stay in touch with them after, continue to serve as a mentor, letter of recommendation writer, what have you. But that's my role at the hospital.
Perfect. And even though, like, I might be able, some of us diversity education that we've been interviewing, trainers can go into a hospital or might get like an hour or so with nurses. What you're able to do is long-term impact. So I'm super glad to have you here.
I'm glad to be here.
So I'm starting off with two concept-based questions.
Okie doke.
So there are no wrong answers, but I want to run them by you and see how they land on you. So first one is diversity dividend. So this typically comes up in kind of the bottom line, like, why are we doing all this diversity training? What does it mean to you in your context and experience thinking about investment, return, and action?
Ooh, wow. It's funny because the first thing I think of is like, I think of the work I do in economic terms, in terms of staff retention in the hospital. So if you think of it that way, all of the work that I do as a nursing educator, but particularly in talking with the nurses about cultural competency, which I'm putting in big quotes and we can come back to that, or diversity, or social determinants of health is another very popular thing that we talk about in healthcare circles, is because we, let me try this again. So look, I am a nice white lady, as many nurse educators are. And many of the nurses that I work with look a lot like me. They may come from somewhat different types of white backgrounds, but like there's other sorts of folks that are in the nursing profession. But generally speaking, historically, like, who, you even probably know this, who is the mother of modern nursing?
Oh, I forgot her name.
My girl Flo. Florence Nightingale, right?
Nightingale. I was getting advanced class and thinking of the X-ray person who then died because of X-rays.
Oh, that's like leveling up. But right,
also a white woman. What's her name?
Yeah, I don't remember that one.
Bonus later. Okay.
But Flo I got. But so, right, like that is what still in all, in many respects in the United States, people think of when you think about nurses. So every kind of training that nurses get in their undergraduate education, and largely when it's talked about in their professional lives, it's othering everybody else who's not a white woman, which is weird because many nurses do not fit that description either. So the way that I think about diversity dividends is to talk about, to challenge that, first of all, and to challenge the idea that the people that you encounter in your practice are necessarily other in a way that makes them more difficult to take care of if they are not meeting a description that sounds like who you think you are. Does that, any of that make any sense?
Totally. Sounds great.
In particular, Syracuse, as I like to say, is centrally isolated. It's about 4 hours drive from Philadelphia, New York City, Montreal, Boston, all of these places. And so everything around it is pretty rural upstate New York. And that's where a lot of our workforce come from. But Syracuse is also a pretty dense urban center for this part of the state. And we've got a large refugee population, a population that is diverse, again, with the air quotes, in like many other sorts of ways. And what I have seen and identified as an opportunity is like, let's talk about the fact that we have this institution that takes care of and heals people from all over the damn place. And yet, like, that may not be everybody's comfort or everyone's exposure or how people self-identify, that you might be working with a really complex population with a lot of systemic underpinnings to like what's brought them into the hospital in the first place. People don't, it always amazes me that this isn't more obvious, but I live in it all the time. People don't talk about this stuff in nursing. People talk about, like, the classic example I always like is, you know, African Americans have a higher incidence of hypertension, and also concurrently a higher incidence of allergy to one of the more commonly used classes of hypertension medication. So that's a thing. But then people don't talk about, like, well, are there other non-physiologic reasons, like centuries of stress and trauma, that might make that be the case? Not just like, oh, you know, patients with hypertension, and like sort of putting those in these like physiologic categories. Like, how do we think about that more, I don't want to say globally, but how do we think about that more holistically and, and comprehensively, right?
Well, and one of the first conversations we had too that I think also comes up is there's the holistic care of what this whole person's DNA has actually been experiencing. But there is also the holistic care of, like, I have filled out this information. So if I identify as Muslim and I don't eat pork, then that also means I can't have this medication.
Heparin, right? Exactly.
Because it is derived from pigs. Right? But like, but holistic in that sense too, is that I said it here when we talked about food, but there's relevant information here too. So.
Or it even can be more basic than that. Like, I'm doing your admission into the hospital, which means I have 7,000 checkboxes I have to get through. And if I ask you, do you have a religious preference that has an impact on your experience of healthcare? If I even ask it that way, like, and you say, yes, I'm Jewish, like, well, do I really ask any follow-up questions? Like, do I feel comfortable that I understand not only what that means in some broader sense, but specifically what that means to you, right? Like,
and what are the expectations of your family roles, and who's going to be coming, and what do we need to know about the people who will be coming to visit? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Which is an interesting segue to the second concept question.
Perfect.
Yeah. Asterisks, other duties assigned. So it's not in your actual job description, and yet it is something that is given to you for whatever reason, or something you take on for whatever reason. What does asterisk other duties assigned mean to you as a person, as a professional, as somebody with a job?
You know, I think there's a lot of reasons about me as an individual and the way I'm socialized and so forth to be this way as a nurse and as a human and as a white lady and like all these other things. But I take my responsibility to and for those nurses really seriously. So that can lead me to do things like, oh, there's a nurse on our trauma ICU who's having a tough time, who works overnights. I'm going to come into work at 6 a.m. so I can catch him before he goes off shift. And like talk to him about what's going on, be a sounding board for whatever those issues are, because I don't know, where I work, it's small and large at the same time. It's really easy for people to feel like, well, you know, I'm out of my initial training period, what nurses call orientation, and now I'm like expected to do all of these heroic / ordinary, depending on who you ask, like things every day, all the time. And it's a really high stress environment. And I struggle with this as an educator, like footnote. talking about social justice and healthcare, you know, is only one component of what I do with them. But I feel like there's a lot of things that go on in that transition that you have to make a lot of space for. And in the day-to-day grind, there isn't always a lot of space for it. So my other duties, as you know, they evolve or whatever, thank you. That's telling that I misheard that as evolve, because scope creep is also a problem, but but that includes, in a very broad sense, like meeting people where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And that can extend to the education that I do with them around understanding implicit bias, for example, like, and making an opportunity for people to talk about their own like fears, limitations, you know, knowledge gaps. It's an intense process to do that with people, because they're in an environment where they're expected to either know everything or really act like they do.
Mm-hmm. Well, and because you're perfect, that's a great transition as well. So we talked a little bit about this cultural competency concept, which I like to, and exactly, I refer to it as cultural humility. And
Ooh.
What I liked about some of the language that you used in our previous conversation, which I want to talk about why not cultural competency. I mean, I get that's a word you need to check. I will say that word to get into the room to tell you why that's the wrong word. But I want to hear about
my whole life.
Yeah. I want to hear your take on the cultural competency, and then what I mean by cultural humility versus the other one is the self-awareness and understanding of that implicit bias as an individual, but also in your world, there's clinical practice that directly impacts patients that are being served.
Yes.
So a lot of times I talk about the work that we do it in the workplace, and then we clock out, and then we're at a grocery store. But I don't think you ever clock out of doing this work. And in your work, you are doing this work with people who will ultimately be working with people in need that might die.
Right. So this is like for me, that's the crux of what being a nurse educator is I like to imagine that I am having, or have the potential to have, an impact on a much greater number of patients than if I was still working at the bedside taking care of people by myself, because I can provide nurses the opportunity to explore these concepts and challenge their own understandings of what they mean, both for themselves individually and for the profession and for the institution and that kind of thing. I mean, what I sort of alluded to, and the word wasn't coming to me right away, we, serve a whole host of categories of folks that you could largely say are vulnerable populations at my facility, right? We care for a lot of people with opiate addiction. We care for a lot of people living with homelessness, who are refugees with truly, in crazy story, like all of these things. And new nurses, interestingly, come in, as I think a lot of people that you've educated do, with this kind of idea that like, well, nurses are all taught to treat people the same, and that there's a certain professional demeanor that's expected when you're caring for patients and families, that I have seen violated over and over and over again, but in situations of stress, or situations where there's a significant language barrier or a perceived gap of some kind, or where there's people's own garbage, like implicit biases and prejudices at play, and they just see it as like, this is a new nurses are so task oriented, this is what I'm going to say, that in some ways they can't get past the like ways in which those things get in the way of them going about their day. Right, and getting their tasks accomplished. Yeah. So cultural competency as a model is really about not the self-awareness. It's about like, do I understand what, fill in the category here, prefer when they're in a healthcare environment? Right. Cultural humility is, do I have some self-awareness of my own cultural situatedness, which I don't think is a word, but it is now.
It is now.
Yes. And can I both hold my awareness of it and understand how it limits me in an individual patient and family encounter?
Yeah.
and be receptive to what it is that that person is showing me that they need.
Mm-hmm.
I will tell you, I've, in my own thinking and in my slow march to graduate school, have started to think about, have started to take that a different step further to think about how can we incorporate a model of structural competency into nursing education, because I think nursing really places a lot of emphasis on, in either talking about cultural competency or cultural humility, places a lot of emphasis on the individual encounter. Like
Mm-hmm.
you and me, I'm the nurse, you're the patient. If I don't do something overtly sexist, racist, homophobic, transphobic, ableist in our encounter, in a way that's like, I mean, this sounds horrible, but like, in a way, that's another box I can check, right? Like I have performed my duties with cultural humility. I have listened, I have been present, I have like, whatever, noticed myself being freaked out, but like didn't let it impact my care. Great. Like to me, that's still a level of awareness that I think can only benefit those
Mm-hmm.
interactions. But it's kind of like my hypertension example, right? Like the level up for nursing is to think about, how do I understand, not only how do I understand nursing as social justice, but how do I understand it as part of some bigger structure, including the fact that like healthcare systems as a whole have contributed to structural inequality.
Absolutely. Yeah. No,
Like,
obviously I completely agree. That's part of the reason I love you to death. Wait,
yee.
what I have just used cultural humility
Mm-hmm.
dangerous, the example of parenting, because I am not a parent. You're welcome. I'm not a parent, but my friends are. But what I've said to when I'm talking to people about cultural humility, I'm like, are you a parent? Yes. And I was like, okay, I am not a parent.
Mm-hmm.
But what I witnessed my friends doing is like talking, if they have a partner, co-parent, whatever, talk other parent friends. What should I do in this scenario? Read some books, read some blogs, do some research, etc. So they have this knowledge. And then, because they got a call from the principal, and the kid comes home at 3:30, and they got to like have a plan. So if they got from noon to 3:30 to prep. So kid comes home, and what the parent is able to do often
Mm-hmm.
to take all of that knowledge and experience that they just had, and like, it's not leaving, it's just being set to the side.
Mm-hmm.
Because then you're like, hi, how are you? And you shut your face and you're listening to said kid, right?
Right.
But like, this seems to be the model of good parenting. And then kid gives you whatever, and you dip back into your experience and you like try some things on and
Right.
see what fits that kid. That's cultural humility. And for specifically for medical care, is that I am coming to you because you have some level of expertise that I do not have.
Right.
And can you set it aside but still be in the room with it so that you can treat me?
Right.
And not just
Right.
page 17.
Or, oh, it's the hypertension in room 24. That's kind of the like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, great. Awesome. Are you ready for my two favorite questions in the whole world?
I can't imagine that I wouldn't be.
Number one.
Let's hear it.
What have you changed your mind about lately?
I have changed my mind about feeling competent in parenting my daughter. I have decided that the things that I thought I understood about how this period of our lives with her were going to work are not altogether wrong, but I think I'm so glad you talked about parenting, actually, because this has been much on my mind. For background, I have a 6th grade daughter, and you would not recognize her from the last time you saw her.
Oh,
Like,
I saw a picture on Facebook the other day, and I was like, when did a 20-year-old move in?
Yeah, well, guess what? Like a month ago. It's really it's outstanding. But I think I've been surprised by my own what am I trying to say? I've been surprised at like how relatable her experience is. I shouldn't be surprised, because there's a lot of things that she's describing and feeling emotionally that are like when I was that age. So I've decided how would I have wanted myself to be parented,
Mm.
and see, rather than like, how have we parented this kid? because I also realize that all the things that are happening are sort of that like temporary, like, oh, like static until like the her that's in there sort of like emerges out. So even though that seems counterintuitive, I just sort of feel like anything I respond to is she's just trying it all on.
Mm-hmm.
So I can relate to that piece of it. So I'm just responding to that rather
Right.
than like, hey, Maddie, I know you're in there, you know, because that does not seem to be working.
Good luck.
Oh, I'm going to need it.
Second favorite question. What do you absolutely know?
That's a really hard, like, lightning round question. Really?
Oh, this isn't the lightning round. Lightning round's coming up.
Oh my God. All right.
These are favorite questions.
Favorite questions. What do
Read
I absolutely...
Read the agenda.
I did. All right. What do I absolutely know? I am my own worst enemy.
That is a very true statement about you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the things that I do are to sort of like assuage that enemy.
All right. Good job.
That got real heavy, but you know, it's true.
Totally true. Before we move into the lightning round, for the record, Madame Marie Curie.
Boom.
Not Flo.
And not a nurse.
Oh, is she a doctor?
Mm-hmm.
What? They let women do that back then? Very impressivo. Okay, we will not do more specific quizzing on that. Okay, but quizzing, icebreaker questions. So I asked you to pick 3 rando numbers.
I did.
Easy, intermediate, or deep questions abound. You pick number 5. First off is easy. If you had to choose a celebrity to play you in a movie of your life, who would it be?
Meryl Streep.
Excellent. Number 34, deep.
Oh boy.
Buckle up. If you suddenly found the courage to do one thing you have always been afraid of doing, what would you want it to be?
I would go back to rock climbing. Because I discovered a fear of heights in my teens. And that hasn't come up much, but like that's by design. So like get back after it.
Nice. All right, good job. 17, intermediate.
Okay.
When and where have you experienced the most peace?
Ooh. Well, so when in the fall of 2006, as the British say, I fell pregnant, which was by design, and we had planned to go to Tulum in Mexico for Thanksgiving. We were trying to get pregnant. We didn't know if we would be, but we were going to Mexico for Thanksgiving. This was the plan. And we were on the beach. I was like 8 weeks pregnant. I couldn't drink, which was fine because all I really needed to do was nap on the beach and eat guacamole. Done.
Perfect.
I mean, come on. I kind of want to do that like tomorrow.
Maybe without the third.
Minus the pregnant part. All shops closed. All done.
Guacamole shop, though.
Way open for business. 24 hours a day.
Good to know. Okay. If people wanted to get in touch with you, where should they go?
I am on Facebook.
On Facebook, like Miley Cyrus, and has a mean gift game. Okay, go ahead.
I mean, listen, I am on Instagram, but that's really only if you like pictures of food. Like, honestly, that's not where you find my work. If you're interested, I have to put this plug in. If you are interested in sending graduating nursing students to upstate New York, you can look on the upstate.edu webpage and look for the nurse residency program. Is that fair?
Totally fair.
All right. And other than that, like Jess has my email and stuff, and I'm.
Yeah, and it'll be below.
And it'll be down there where the thing. Yep.
Yeah, the thing. All right.
I'm not that fancy. Like, I think I might have a LinkedIn account. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, I have an Instagram account. It sounds like a venereal disease, but I have one.
I don't know. My kids say, the 6th grader, Facebook is for old people.
Truth.
Fair.
Stay off then.
She's on TikTok. I barely know what that is. Yeah, exactly.
Never even heard of it.
Snapchat is just for the filters, and Twitter is for Trump.
With that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.